So, is sunscreen good for you? Is the topic of the video, but even stranger, how does it relate to vitamin A and vitamin D? This is Ryan over High Carb Regenerator. Welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about this. This actually all stems from me watching a video of kind of a friend, and they had like a blanket on them in a car. I'm like, why the hell would you do that? And she was like, to block out the sun. I'm like, we need the sun to live. Like, why would you do that? Why would you even think of doing that? And then I started thinking about sunscreen, and I started thinking about, you know, this whole topic of vitamin D and vitamin A, because somebody sent me a video about it, and I was kind of reading about vitamin A, and so I made this video. And as I'm like thinking about it now, I'm just thinking about that Dr. Berg and a couple other of these, you know, quote unquote doctors who are talking about their supplements and selling supplements. And I got them in, you know, in my head, and then I got down here, I'm thinking, you know, McDougal talking about how bad this stuff is for you. Don't take vitamin D, don't take any of this kind of stuff. And started thinking about this, and I go down this crazy rabbit hole that I've gone down this past like 4 or 5 days, and I decided I got to make a video of about this. It's got to happen. All right. So as I said, I'm not really a big fan of sunscreen. I really don't wear it all that much. To be perfectly honest with you, I've never really trusted it ever. Like, you know, I remember it kind of really coming out in the 80s. They were putting bananas on it and making it smell all coconutty and all that kind of stuff. But I just really wasn't into it. So I wanted to look, when was, when was sunscreen first around? And so I looked into it. In the 60s and 70s, we had suntan lotion, which was a SPF of 2. Take a little edge off the sun. Read this wrong. The first SPF 15 was introduced in 86. I do remember that. That was like the banana something or other. It came in like an orange tube. I think it had a yellow lid, and you would squirt it out. We really weren't into using it too much, right? But my grandfather was, interestingly enough, my grandma would always be putting it, because he had a bald head and everything, and she was always putting it on him. And years later, he had all this kind of skin cancer, and it kind of turned me off from ever using it. So, right. So, and then 30 SPF, not until the early 1990s. So the one thing that I wanted to look into was, when did we start seeing a lot of cases of skin cancer? And it turns out during the time that sunblock was coming out. And I couldn't figure this out. I couldn't figure out why. So I'm going to go into a couple of other things here, but it's really been baffling me. I just been looking into this, because why would somebody in a car, which is UV, protected glass anyways, wear like a wrap just because everybody's so paranoid about the sun? We need the sun to get vitamin D. I'm going to get into that. As you can see across the top here, there's a ton of stuff that I'm going to be doing here. Later in life, he got skin cancer, and it kind of I always thought maybe the two related, but I couldn't figure out how. So I started making this video, and I started looking into it, and how does vitamin A relate to it? Because there's a lot of retinols, which is vitamin A, and in all these sunscreens, in the anti-acne, in the skin world, and all this kind of stuff. And when you really dig into it, it's crazy how much stuff vitamin A is in. So somebody sent me something about vitamin A. This isn't the email they sent me, but I wanted to talk about this because I know retinol is one of the vitamin A's under the vitamin A category, and we're going to get into this. There's a lot here, so buckle down. Just take some notes. You might have to watch this twice. This is a lot of information, but I knew that I had seen retinols in a lot of these sunscreens, and I don't really trust retinol. So one of the things that you see in the toxicity is mental status changes are from vitamin E intoxication, risk of seizures, headaches, blurred vision, chronic toxicity can lead to alopecia, anorexia, dryness of mucous membranes, muscle and bone pain, and hyperlipidemia. So basically you get, fatter. And then here's one for, I just started looking into this. I kind of wanted to look into all the forms of vitamin A. Mental status changes are common in vitamin E intoxications. In addition, there's a risk of seizures, headache, blurred vision, elevated intracranial pressure. Chronic toxicity can also lead to the other things, but there's one of the most common is liver issues. So here we go, taking more than 10,000 micrograms a day of oral vitamin. Now, I'm going to get into this as bone thinning, liver damage, headache, diarrhea, nausea, skin irritation, pain in the joints and bones, and birth defect. So I'm going to get just rid of these kind of as we go. And then here's retinol palmonate, and it's basically the same thing. You don't see too much differences in it, but this version also gives you liver damage. Other names. So here's some of the other names of vitamin A, beta carotene. And I always thought that it was odd, and it is a fat soluble, but if you juice too many carrots, your skin actually starts to turn orange. And it's like, why would it do that? So it's staying in the system way longer than you probably would want it to, especially if you're juicing or eating a lot of stuff with color in it every day. You're going to start having issues here, you know, with too much, because it's fat soluble. And the thing is when they're going to test your vitamin A, there's only going to be so much in your blood, so it's going to look normal. But meanwhile, you get a ton of it in your system. And so they're also fortifying, most foods, fortifying a widely consumed centrally processed food or condiment, capitalizes on the production and distribution food system of the food market to deliver the low doses of vitamin A daily to a large number of people. Food fortification has many advantages. Is generally socially acceptable. It requires minimal changes in food habits. It usually costs 2% or less of the unfortified food. Its delivery system is already in place, and so they can do it whenever they want to. And it got me to thinking: is vitamin A in sugar? Because last year I did the long stint of a pound of sugar a day, but I started having a lot of trouble. And actually, if you watch afterwards, my weight gain it went up again. I got down to 262, maybe even the 250s. I wasn't weighing myself every day, but my gut started really hurting, and I started having a lot of other issues. So I had that in the back of my mind. And then I came across this study where, if playing around with zinc and copper, and I had lower copper, and a lot of us have lower zinc nowadays because it's not in the food. All right, so here we go. So alterations in dietary levels of copper and vitamin A independently affected hemoglobin levels. Serum cholesterol concentrations were affected by interactions between zinc and vitamin A, and copper and vitamin A. Level of retinol and retinol palmitate in liver and kidneys were significantly higher in rats fed on diets with increased dietary vitamin A than in those fed on diets with adequate vitamin A, which isn't good, because if too much vitamin A is in your system, it can damage your liver. And it was in the liver and in the kidneys. So anyway, so here I found this. It looks like sugar is fortified with vitamin A. All right, I couldn't find any real 100%, but sugar has been fortified with vitamin A in Central American countries for years. Now, do we get that from them as fortified with vitamin A? I don't know, but I did have a lot of problems with the conventional sugar, and I'm wondering if it had a lot of vitamin A in it, because I have had liver issues for a very, very, very long time. So, it's very hard to find. And unfortunately, with the FDA being the way it is since 2020, they don't actually have to tell you anymore. They can put it in there. They don't even have to tell you. So it's hard to know if it's vitamin A is in what you're eating. All right, real quick, I wanted to point out the fact that I was at my parents' house yesterday, and we were talking about this a little bit. And my mom told me that there's a bill in office right now to make sure that the FDA gets rid of this rule that they don't have to put anything on the labels anymore. So hopefully that actually happens. And so here's 18 signs of vitamin A toxicity: blurry vision and other vision changes, osteoporosis, swelling of the bones, bone pain, poor appetite, dizziness, nausea and vomiting, sensitivity sensitivity to sunlight, dry, rough skin, itchy or peeling skin, cracked fingernails, skin cracks at the corners of your mouth ulcers. I actually know a few people who do a lot of sugar and they're always having mouth ulcers. So could that be the cause of it? Yellowed skin, hair loss, respiratory infection, confusion, kidney damage, headache, irritability, rash, and here we go, weight gain and obesity. You know, there you go with that. So I wanted to listen to this for a little while, and then I'll get a little bit more into it here.
What I got suspicious about was these experiments were using casein as a protein source in the diet.
Okay.
And what happened in...
What they're talking about is there was suspected vitamin A issues back in the day, and they're trying to pinpoint it. Unfortunately, they were using rats and mice, and they were not doing well.
And so kind of throughout the series of experiments used to identify vitamin A as a vitamin, they use casein in the diet as their source of protein. But what they know is that casein could have vitamin A in it, and it could have fat components in it. So they go through this incredible process of sterilizing and extracting the casein, or extracting all the fat out of the casein with solvents, particularly ether and alcohol.
Okay.
And they heat it and they aerate it, and they really kind of, go to town on, sterilizing this casein using these diets. And
casein is so toxic as it is.
And then kind of what happened, so I think 1913 is probably pretty conclusive that there's something in the fat that's essential in the diet. And it was kind of, I guess proposed at that time that this would be vitamin A. Then there's a bit of a break in the research, probably due to the First World War, so in 1914 to 1918. Then there's kind of a resurgence of the research in the early 1920s, 1923. And there's another study done by Lobach.
All right, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, yep, go ahead.
Okay, so just kind of repeat myself just a little bit. So you got Wilhelm Stepp in 1912-13 doing his experiments on trying to isolate a fat-soluble factor in his animals. The interesting thing about the Stepp experiments is that he's routinely killing his animals within 3 weeks, almost across the board. But what's even more interesting is he's killing his animals proportional to the heating time of the casein. So the more he heats and the longer he heats the casein, the more deadly his diet is. And so he doesn't understand that. And he gets perplexed by that. And I think it's kind of one of the factors why he kind of sort of, I'm going to say, gives up. But he does.
I'm actually going to link this video in the description section, so go ahead and check it out. I'm not going to listen to the whole thing. It's just there's a couple of important little tidbits in a second here.
Let's go on and do some follow-on research, but nevertheless. Now, kind of tragically, McCullum and the Americans follow along with that process. They use casein and they heat it, and they feed it to the animals, saying this is a safe source of protein. And likewise, kind of in most of the fall. This
was kind of back in the huge protein craze that started late 1800s. I guess it really hasn't gone away, and health concerns haven't gone away either.
Follow-up studies. They're using casein, heated casein, usually in alcohol, and their animals die.
So just to sum it up, they're basically looking for some kind of fat-soluble thing. They don't know what it is yet, and they're feeding this diet to mice or rats, and they're using casein as the protein source, but they're heating it quite a bit, and they're finding, although they might not be realizing it, that the more they heat this casein, the faster these rats die.
Yes. Now, it's interesting about Stepp's experiments. He doesn't really... he's a good scientist, and he documents his procedures and outcomes, but nowhere does he actually make that statement that he says, but if you read his results, you can actually see it. So Stepp was using mice and McCullum was using rats. So in the McCullum experiments, his animals are usually dying in about 8 to 10 weeks. And other follow-on experiments, these animals die in about 8 to 10 weeks. So you could say, well, the rat is a hardier animal, and the mice were dying sooner just because they're a little bit weaker. But still, something doesn't add up right away there for me, because why would it be proportional to the heating time of the casein to the death rate of these animals? So something didn't fit quite right there for me. The second thing that was really quite shocking to me, or surprising, is all of the symptoms that they produce in these experiments, which are kind of catastrophic head to toe destruction of these animals that they attribute to vitamin A deficiency, are actually the perfect textbook description of vitamin A toxicity. So,
okay, so that's what I wanted you to know. So basically, these animals were dying from the toxicity of vitamin A, which isn't good, and it didn't take very long. So I got to thinking, I went back to the sunscreen. Is vitamin A in sunscreen? Skin Deep data shows that various forms of vitamin A are found in hundreds of sunscreens, skin lotions, lipsticks, and lip sunscreens products used on sun-exposed skin. Article here says vitamin A, aka retinol palmidite, is still found in many sunscreens, even though it's not supposed to be. So I looked into this. The association of vitamin A and carotenoids in the development of the association with vitamin A in the development of several cancers, including breast, cervix, skin, prostate, oral cancer, and leukemia, has been highlighted in many studies. So not only are we getting it in topical stuff, we're also getting it in our food, and it also is very well documented to shut down your liver. So I looked into this, and here we go. Is your chronic gut issue really a liver gallbladder issue? And if we're over fortified with vitamin A, this could legitimately be a thing. I can't tell you how many clients I talk to have just done a bunch of gut work, but don't find themselves feeling much better. Most of these gut work protocols revolve around the heavy use of antimicrobials, blah, 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 blah. You can quite literally kill some good bacteria, so you don't want to do that. In nutritional therapy, biliary issues, especially biliary stasis or sluggish bile flow, is something that we are taught to never ignore. And I'm telling you, it all comes back to liver and biliary issues in clients with chronic gut symptoms that don't easily resolve. The liver gallbladder axis governs digestion in so many ways. A sick liver equals poor bile acid composition, and bile regulation equals bad environment, resulting in symptoms like mood issues, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, systemic inflammation. And the reason this one's important to me is because when I first went to the chiropractor, the one I talk about a lot in PA, he said that I had the back of a 75-year-old. He hadn't ever seen a stiffer back in his life, and I had a lot of systemic inflammation. Sensitivity to everything, food, supplements, environment, which I've had. This is why so many get, all this kind of other stuff, how the liver impacts the gut. And you can read this. I'm going to, maybe link this down below. But too much vitamin A is bad for the liver. The liver is already compromised. It's already can't work. We see that vitamin A causes a lot of cancers. And then we also see that the gut is affected by the liver being so destroyed. We've looked into all this stuff with vitamin A. And one of the things that you really got to think about with vitamin A is if you're in a tropical area, you're going to be living in an area there's a lot of vitamin D, because there's vitamin D coming from the sun, and it's kind of counteract the vitamin A. Right? It's not, their vitamin A is not going to be as strong, especially probably if you're living off the land. It's not going to be in fortified foods. It's just going to be in the foods that you eat. It's going to probably be a much more, assimilated by the body. But the thing is, vitamin A is fat soluble, so it's going to be stored in the fat systems. It's going to be stored in the fat. And if you have more weight on you, you're going to have more fat on you, and you're going to have more vitamin A. And as we saw in the video, vitamin A is causing liver issues, bone issues, cancer issues, issues all the way around. It's in, it's fortified or whatever in sugar nowadays, most of the foods that we eat. All right, so here we are. And I wanted to look into vitamin D because I feel like there's something going on with vitamin A and vitamin D. Wanted to check into this. Somebody sent me this. I've heard of this guy before. I think I've even seen the book. I did a lot on vitamin D last year. So Jeff T. Bowles or whatever. So here we go. This is actually a decent amount. I got some times written down that I wanted to listen to. Just a couple minutes here.
Like I mentioned earlier, I actually check vitamin D, which a lot of doctors don't even check. And man, just about everybody is vitamin D deficient, and we're talking less than 30. And I find some that are in the teens, or I've even had some less than 10, which is really, really low. So
a couple years ago, I was doing just a regular walk at a park, and I heard a loud pop, and I knew it was my bone in my foot had broken. And I went to the doctor, and he's like, I don't understand why this is happening. And I'm like, well, why don't you have my vitamin D tested? And sure enough, it was only a 6. A 6. It's terrible. Of course your bone's going to break. And, not only does vitamin A toxicity, make your bone density lower, having a low vitamin D is also going to do the same thing.
in your research, why as a society are we so vitamin D deficient? Is it just lack of sun?
I think, well, it's like sunscreen.
There you go. So if you're lower in vitamin D, you're going to have a lower bone density already. And then if they're fortifying it with vitamin A, and you're going to have too much of it in your system, and you're eating the foods like I was just talking about, like even watermelon, tomatoes, all this kind of stuff we grow during the summer. This is very high in vitamin A, especially if you're growing it yourself. Your bone density is going to be lower. No wonder everybody's got osteoporosis, liver issues, and the gamut weight issues. And then they're putting on the sunscreen because, the sun's going to kill you. This whole thing with the ozone layer, ozone, people spraying stuff on their hair is going to cause the ozone layer. I never bought into it. It always made no sense to me.
We probably weren't that D3 deficient up until the 1980s, and
Sunscreen came out.
And our good scientists, warned us about how awful the sun was, and we must use sunscreen and wear a hat and stay out of the sun. And that,
yeah, we thrived in the sun up until then. Now I know we lived probably in more wooded areas or trees, so we didn't get as much sun exposure as you might like in an area that had no trees. But I mean, come on.
That is just causing the entire population's D3 levels to crash. I wrote one paper, it's on my website. It's titled Overwhelming Proof That Vitamin D3 Deficiency Causes Most Human Diseases. And it shows how it's got graph after graph that shows almost every known disease that affects people under the age of 70 has been skyrocketing since around 1980.
Yeah, sunscreen.
Obviously, we all know about obesity, but asthma, autism, multiple sclerosis, all the cancers, pediatric cancers. I never used to hear of peanut allergies when I was a kid in the 70s, and now they're supposedly very common. Just everything's been skyrocketing, and it all goes back to this advice to stay out of the sun.
Yeah, we are sun beings. Like, if you got a cat in your house, these cats are magnets to the sunlight. They'll lay in. We think they're crazy because they already got all this fur and they're laying in the hot sun. They do it for a reason.
And to use sunscreen. And I don't know if that was an accidental thing that the scientists did, because do you want me to go into the conspiracy theory?
Oh, shit.
Go ahead.
All right. So Casimir Funk in the 1920s.
Now, finding research on this, because I did try to find it before I did this video, is impossible. But I have seen this research that he's talking about back in the day when I actually went to the library and read these studies because I was a nerd with this kind of stuff. So I know what he's talking about.
20s, he's the father of all our vitamins. He discovered vitamin D3 and also a weaker form called D2 that's made by plants. Like if you shine a sun lamp on mushrooms, you'll get vitamin D2. That's very similar to D3. It's just weaker and it's not as safe for humans to take.
It actually shows mortality rate going down if you take a lot of D2, which I don't want to do. I've done that. If you look vitamin D on my channel, you'll see it somewhere. I don't know, last year.
Taking high doses, I would recommend never take vitamin D2.
If I can find it, I'll put it somewhere. You know, a card for it.
D3 is the animal form that we make.
But you can actually somehow get vegan D3.
Our skin when we sit in the sun, and so basically. It was known back in the 1920s as the sunshine vitamin. Everybody started taking it. They were putting it in hot dogs and beer. This is all, you read this in my book, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that's the beginning of the book, is the history of this D3. And they were putting it in everything. They were irradiating milk because that caused the milk to make vitamin D2. Or maybe D3 since it came from a cow. But they'd shine it on mushrooms. So basically, then people were taking, back then a lot of people were just taking 25 milligrams a day of vitamin D3.
Can you imagine? I mean, you can't even get close to that these days.
Or vitamin D. It could have been a mix of D2 or D3. And the weird thing was, according to this one doctor who knew, he's passed away by now, but I read his statements. He said back then they were taking so much D3 that the hospitals in the 1920s became empty, and that the hospitals had been way overbuilt in the 1920s. They were trying to turn it into a profitable industry, the medical world, because most medicine had been done in people's houses up until that point. And they built all these hospitals, and we had.
How do you create it profitable? You create an insurance company that barely pays anything or fights with the insurance for the hospital, and the hospital fights with the insurance company. Meanwhile, nobody gets anything done, and then all they do is give you narcotics, basically, to numb everything that's going on with you and not actually fix anything.
Had way more hospital beds per person back then in the 20s than we do now. And they were expecting all these patients to make all this money, and the hospitals were empty. So what did modern medicine do back? Well, not modern. The 1920s scientists in medicine back then. What did they do? Did they just close up their hospitals? No. Instead, they recalibrated 25 milligrams of vitamin D, and they renamed it or remeasured it, and now it's 25 milligrams became 1 million international units. And they told everyone, do not take more than 400 units a day, or otherwise it's dangerous. And they had a few weird studies they pointed to where some animals were killed with high dose D3, but it turns out there is probably mixed with the various impurities. But and so the population, little by little, just was brainwashed into only taking 400 units a day, and that's just enough, they figured, to where it kept children from developing rickets in their legs.
All right, there you go. So that's that part of it. All right, so here are some symptoms of when vitamin D is low: fatigue, not sleeping well, bone pain or achiness, which is the same for too much vitamin A, depression or feeling of sadness, hair loss, muscle weakness, loss of appetite, getting sick more easily, pale skin. There's others, there's others, but this is the 9 that I found. And then I'm not even going to talk about this one, but so vitamin D deficiency has been found to be associated with a variety of cancers, including prostate, multiple myeloma, colorectal, and breast cancer. And there's other cancers and morbidity, and everything with the vitamin D being low. And the last thing that I wanted to leave you with here is, does sunscreen block vitamin D? And the answer basically is yes. They always try to say it doesn't, but everybody's, it's just coincidental, apparently, that vitamin D went way low as soon as sunscreen came out. So, yeah. And, and then here's another thing. Some people think that you can get vitamin D even when you've got clothes covering. What if I'm wearing clothes? A common misconception is that you can get vitamin D from sun through clothing. This is not true. So not only are you putting vitamin A fortified sunscreen on your skin, is possibly causing cancer and damaging your liver and blocking vitamin D, You've also, everybody, you know, doesn't want to go out in the sun these days. But I think the only counterbalance to this is most people don't even like wearing clothes anymore. You pretty much see people out there wearing, you know, nothing. But are they putting on sunscreen? I don't know. So anyway, that's the conclusions here. All right, so that's all I have for this video. But in conclusion, basically, this started off with sunscreen. When sunscreen came around, the rate of skin cancer went way up, way up. I mean, it finally tapered off around 2011, but that's a long time for it to just climb. And so, and there's a lot of vitamin A in the sunscreens, a lot of vitamin A fortification in our foods, and that is causing a lot of imbalances with the vitamin D of the world, which would kind of counterbalance vitamin A if we were living the way we're supposed to. So it really wouldn't matter. But you got this stuff fortified in your foods. They know it causes all this kind of issues. So it's causing issues with the liver. It's causing issues with your bones. Causing issues with weight gain. And then your liver's got issues. And then your liver can't function properly. So that makes you more overweight. And you can't undo it because you got this constant influx of vitamin A coming in. And if you look at the Wilson's temperature syndrome, which, you know, a lot of people say is woo-woo, but even if it's, you know, whatever, it's causing issues with the liver as well, and you got a lower body temperature, so your metabolism is as high as it should be, so that's making you fatter. And then you have the low vitamin D, which vitamin D is needed to process food, so that's backing you up too. And it can screw up your entire system if you don't have enough vitamin D. And as you saw in the thing, vitamin D was basically the cure-all back in the day. And I don't want to get into this. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't want to get into this, you know, take this. But I'm going to post these videos down below, but you can make up your own decision. But so you got the high vitamin A, which is at best kind of a vitamin, but mostly just a toxin, you know, a byproduct, which was killing the rats in a couple weeks. Or the mice in a couple weeks, the rats in like a month or two. And then you've got all this coming in. So you got issues with the cancer, you got issues with the liver, you got issues with the bone density. And then with the lower vitamin D, then you also have the bone density issues. You have the hair loss. You have hair loss with both toxic things. And you see a lot of bald people these days. A lot of obesity caused from a lack of vitamin D. Because if you have a lack of vitamin D, your body thinks it's in hibernation mode and it's storing food on your belly, which is, I made a video about last year, or stores fat wherever it can because it thinks in hibernation mode because it doesn't have enough vitamin D. And you're getting fatter from the toxic vitamin A, and you're getting fatter from the lack of vitamin D. And now you're putting sunscreen on to block the vitamin D. You got clothes on that blocks the vitamin D. It's a roller coaster of stupid, right? And so you got all these things against you, and you wonder why. Even if you go on like this crazy like Dorian Rider or Star Solution, you know, and you got McDougall telling you that vitamin D, you don't need to take it, but it's like it basically puts you in hibernation mode if you're too low. So you got all these things against you, and I think the solution is to kind of, if you live in the north and you don't want to take vitamin D, which is fine, whatever, but you're going to have to not have vitamin A foods in your system during the winter, because if you never can get rid of this, if you can never get rid of the vitamin A in your system, you're always going to be stuck in this loop. So, you know, and that probably is what happened to me in 2016. I was on a lot of magnesium and the vitamin D. I'm not going to go into that right now. You can see a lot of that in the video, one of the videos I posted about the vitamin D, but the magnesium and the vitamin D is very important. I was outside in the sun, so I was getting a lot of vitamin D. I finally got my magnesium levels to where I needed them to. And then I quit in the winter because, you know, stupid thing. And the weight gain started coming back. So I think this is the cycle that I've been in, now that I really look at it, because everybody thinks that I'm eating 10,000 calories an hour, which is absolutely stupid. I don't eat anywhere near as much as people think I do. And maybe that's the problem too, but I think I found the solution. So you got the systemic inflammation being caused because of too much vitamin A, most likely. And you know, you got the systemic inflammation, which I have a lot of people have a lot of. That's going to back up your lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system's not going to be able to operate anymore. So that's going to back up into your liver, because your liver is actually like the main detoxer. The lymphatic system is the micro detoxer. And so if your lymphatic system is backed up, that's going to back up into your liver. Then your liver can't operate. Then you got too much vitamin A coming in, and that destroys your liver. And then you got the lack of copper and the zinc and the boron also counteracting this. And now I didn't go over this in the video, but you know, I'm probably going to be making more videos about this, and it creates a nightmare. So your body's constantly toxic, constantly overinflamed, constantly, and then you got putting the sunscreen on because the sun's terrible. Somehow we made it millions of years with the sun, but now it's terrible. Can't go out in it. You know, it's changed. It's a different sun somehow. And, you know, you get all this stuff and you listen to these people. I never did. I as soon as the news said something, even when I was 5, I'm like, I'm doing that. If they say this, I'm going this way. I don't trust these people. Never have, never will. And so you get caught in this cycle. And you know, then you got people you put you on a dietary program, and they think that you're eating Twinkies and Burger King every day with washing it down with some donuts and having Pizza Hut for breakfast, but you're not. And so this is probably what's happening. Something within this system is probably what's happening. And I think I cut myself off like 30 times here. But if you're somebody who lives in a winter climate, you don't want to take vitamin D. I would at least take magnesium. And I would really cut down on vitamin A foods in the wintertime and see what happens, or just right now and see what happens. Because another reason that I've been making this video is I've been eating a ton of watermelon. I've noticed a lot of like liver pain and swelling, and I think the vitamin A might be too high. But it's a fat soluble. You can't really test for it. So what do you do? Anyway, comments, questions down below. Like, subscribe. This is probably one of the most shareable videos I've ever made. So do share this with somebody, because this relates to everybody. This is not a vegan thing. This is not a vegetarian thing. This is not a keto thing or whatever. It could be the cycle that you're in, and maybe vitamin A is not as much in the carnivore and the keto foods, and maybe that's why some of this is happening. I don't know, but there's something here. I get a lot of information from people. A lot of it's just something that I just, even me, it's a little too woo-woo for me. But this one really seemed pretty relevant. Anyway, share the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you in the next one.